In the 1950s and 60s, inventor Dennis Gabor discovered that when you photograph objects with a split light beam and store the information as wave interference patterns, you get a better image than with ordinary point-to-point intensity photographs. Not only is the captured image clearer, but it is completely three-dimensional. Lynn McTaggart wrote, "In a classic laser hologram, a laser beam is split. One portion is reflected off an object, a china teacup, say. The other is reflected by several mirrors. They are then reunited and captured on a piece of photographic film. The result on the plate, which represents the interference pattern of these waves, resembles nothing more than a set of squiggles or concentric circles. However, when you shine a light beam from the same kind of laser through the film, what you see is a fully realized, incredibly detailed, three-dimensional, virtual image of the china teacup floating in space." An example of this is the image of Princess Leia, which gets generated by R2-D2 in the first movie of the Star Wars series. Michael Talbot wrote, "A hologram is produced when a single laser light is split into two separate beams. The first beam is bounced off the object to be photographed. Then the second beam is allowed to collide with the reflected light of the first. When this happens, they create an interference pattern, which is then recorded on a piece of film. As soon as another laser beam is shined through the film, a three-dimensional image of the original object reappears. The three-dimensionality of such images is often eerily convincing. You can actually walk around a holographic projection and view it from different angles as you would a real object. However, if you reach out and try to touch it, your hand will waft right through it, and you will discover there is really nothing there." The three-dimensionality of holographic images is not their only amazing attribute. In holograms, all parts are reflected in the whole, and the whole is reflected in all parts. So if you chop a piece of holographic film into tiny bits, then shine a laser onto any of them, no matter how small, you will still get a complete image. Greg Braden wrote, "Back in the 1980s, a series of bookmarks appeared on the market using holographic technology. Each one was made of a shiny strip of silver paper that looked like glossy aluminum foil at first glance. When the paper was held directly under a bright light and tilted back and forth, however, suddenly the images in the foil looked as though they'd come to life and were hovering in the air just above the paper itself. If you have one of these bookmarks, you can do an experiment to demonstrate for yourself just how a hologram works. Use a sharp pair of scissors to cut your beautiful shiny bookmark into hundreds of pieces of any shape. Then take the smallest of the fragments and cut it again into an even tinier piece. If the bookmark is truly a hologram, you'll be able to look at your tiny speck of a bookmark under a magnifying glass and still see the entire image, only on a smaller scale. The reason why is that it exists everywhere throughout the bookmark." The physical world around us behaves much like a hologram. Just like a piece of holographic film, all quanta exist as interfering wave patterns. In and of themselves, these interference waves have no solidity, no definite properties or location, just like the squiggles or circles on holographic film. The image is distributed throughout the entire film, just as quanta are distributed throughout the entire universe. Then, when a laser beam, the light of consciousness, is directed at those interference waves, seemingly solid particles, three-dimensional images, appear before our eyes. One of the first physicists to consider this cosmic hologram metaphor was David Bohm, who defined the universe as an undivided wholeness in flowing motion, which he termed the hollow movement. Dean Radin wrote, "Einstein's protege, American physicist David Bohm, felt that quantum theory suggested the existence of a deeper reality than the one presented by our senses. He dubbed the implicate order an undivided holistic realm that is beyond concepts like space-time, matter, or energy. In the implicate order, everything is fully enfolded or entangled with everything else. By contrast, the explicate order, world of ordinary observations and common sense emerge, or unfold, out of the implicate order. Bohm used a hologram as a metaphor to illustrate how information about a whole system can be enfolded into an implicit structure, any part of which reflects the whole. Bohm's implicate order is analogous to the two-dimensional piece of holographic film, and the explicate order is analogous to the three-dimensional holographic image. The implicate order is the underlying undivided wholeness of the universe, and the explicate order is the multitude of seemingly separate forms. To illustrate this duality, consider the following passages from my book Asbestos Head. If you blur your vision enough, forms disappear and you are left with nothing but a mass of color in motion. There is no word that describes the blur, but perhaps you make one up. Then you make a habit of making up words for blurs and start recognizing similarities. You label tree blurs, rock blurs, other animal blurs, and maybe even atom blurs. This allows you to compare and categorize, make judgments and express artistic concerns about the blurs, but the fact remains that the boundaries between blurs are perceptual, not actual. We know no two trees, rocks, animals, or atoms are exactly alike, but if no two things are exactly alike, we have no way to measure what constitutes one thing or its other. If no two things are exactly alike, then there must be only one true form that is everything, i.e., the universal hologram. We know that subatomic particles are constantly in motion, but on a smaller scale than we can perceive. We know the universe is perpetually changing and in motion, but we perceive most things as unchanging and still. Then we use language to label this fallacious stillness. We recognize similarities in the stillness and create categories and definitions. We forget all about our faulty premise and attribute a priori importance to these forms we perceive, though in fact knowing no two things are truly separate and everything is constantly moving, aka the hollow movement. Michael Talbot wrote, Bohm cautions that this does not mean the universe is a giant undifferentiated mass. Things can be part of an undivided whole and still possess their own unique qualities. To illustrate what he means, he points to the little eddies and whirlpools that often form in a river. At a glance, such eddies appear to be separate things and possess many individual characteristics such as size, rate, and direction of rotation, etc. But careful scrutiny reveals that it is impossible to determine where any given whirlpool ends and the river begins. Thus, Bohm is not suggesting that the differences between things is meaningless. He merely wants us to be aware constantly that dividing various aspects of the hollow movement into things is always an abstraction, a way of making those aspects stand out in our perception by our way of thinking. In attempts to correct this, instead of calling different aspects of the hollow movement things, he prefers to call them relatively independent subtotalities. For Bohm, atoms are not the building blocks of matter, but rather just a term given to one aspect of the hollow movement. The various forms we name, words and categories we create, are all ultimately arbitrary because at the implicate level of reality, everything is one. No two atoms, two rocks, two trees, or two people are any more separate from one another than whirlpools are separate from the river. The universe is a holographic oneness in perpetual motion, both created and navigated by consciousness. Matter is not separated by space and time. Rather, matter, space, and time are always, already, ever present and one. To illustrate this, think of a DVD. At the explicate level of the DVD, you see a movie with people, places, and events happening in space and time. For the actors on your television screen, they experienced everything happening in real time, in the real world, during filming. But for you, the viewer, holding the DVD in your hand, you can see the implicate level of the movie, where all the people, places, and events on it are mere projections of a single totality. You can rewind, fast-forward, slow-mo, or freeze-frame the entire realistic three-dimensional explicate world of the DVD because you are operating from the implicate world of remote control. The One, God, infinite consciousness, cosmic mind, or whatever you want to call it, operates at the objective, omnipresent, omniscient, omnipotent level of the implicate DVD, and meanwhile, us humans, animals, plants, insects, and every other subjective entity in the physical universe are method actors in the explicate movie. Bohm himself said, "It will be ultimately misleading, and indeed wrong, to suppose, for example, that each human being is an independent actuality who interacts with other human beings and with nature. Rather, all these are projections of a single totality." Greg Braden wrote, "While it may look as though we are disconnected from one another and the rest of the world, that detachment doesn't exist on the plane where the hologram originates. On this level of unity, there really can be no such things as here and there." Michael Talbot wrote, "Matter does not exist independently from so-called empty space. It is a part of space. Space is not empty. It is full, a plenum, as opposed to a vacuum, and is the ground for the existence of everything, including ourselves." Adrian Cooper wrote, "David Bohm's work into quantum physics and quantum mechanics also realized and affirmed a single ultimate reality, the true nature of the universe. Time will inevitably show the universal explicate, implicate, and superimplicate orders of David Bohm and the Hollow movement will eventually have most profound implications for humanity, which all science will quite simply have to accept, sooner or later, thus proving conclusively the universe, rather than being a vast and disparate multitude of separately interacting particles of matter, is in reality a magnificent, unbroken completeness, a continuum, an infinite flowing movement of energy, vibration, the Hollow movement." Independently of David Bohm's research, Stanford neuroscientist Carl Pribram proposed a holographic model for explaining the structure and function of the human brain. His work strongly suggests that the brain stores information not locally in so-called engrams, but holographically throughout its entirety. Greg Braden wrote, "Interestingly, while Pribram and David Bohm began their work independently, both were using the same explanations to describe the results of their experiments. They were each applying the holographic model to make sense of life. Bohm, as a quantum physicist, was looking at the universe as a hologram. Pribram, as a neuroscientist, was studying the brain as a holographic processor. When the two theories are combined, what results is nothing less than a paradigm-shattering possibility." Individual memories were long thought to exist locally in specific areas of the brain. However, thanks to the work of Dr. Carl Pribram, Dr. Carl Lashley, Dr. Paul Peach, and others, we now know this is not the case. Dr. Carl Lashley and other scientists have trained rats to navigate mazes, then removed their brains piece by piece, attempting to find where engrams, individual memories, exist. Strangely, however,